What is going on, guys? Welcome back to the channel, and today, as you can tell by the title, we are going to be jumping into a hero guide, the second hero guide for these new droids, this one focused on the BB-8. For those who haven't seen the BB-9E guide, these two are in a slightly different format, which depending on how much you guys like it, I may actually use for all of my hero guides going forward. You can see on screen what we're going to be going through. We'll of course start off with his base stats, then go through and break down all of his abilities, plus I will touch on those passive abilities as well. And then I will touch on some tips for both the large scale game modes and the hero game modes, covering two different card loadouts for each mode, as well as just some general gameplay tips as well. So if that is what you guys are looking for in a hero guide, then make sure to drop a like on the video. Now, as always, keep in mind that almost everything in this guide was tested in arcade, so just bear in mind that if you see any stats that don't seem right, then that is most likely just due to those small arcade differences. So, getting stuck into it, first off we're going to take a look at his base HP, and he does have the same as most of the blaster heroes in the game, coming in at 650 HP. On top of that though, he has the ability to regen 300 HP, which is actually higher than I think 15 of the other characters in the game, plus he has a card to boost this as well, so his health regen is right up there with the best. Now, his weapon of choice is his Shock Prod, which is obviously a pretty unique weapon for Battlefront 2, and unlike BB-9E, this one doesn't actually have a stun that goes along with it, but it does actually deal a little bit more damage to compensate. It deals 29 damage to the enemy no matter what angle you hit them from, and if you hold down the trigger it'll actually damage them 3 times per second, so by that math it deals roughly 87 damage per second. Now, in the BB-9E guide, I mentioned that quickly alternating the triggers will actually drain the stamina twice as fast, yet it won't deal any more damage. However, there is actually a patch dropping before this video goes live, I think tomorrow night as I'm recording this, where they mentioned a change coming for that which should stop that from happening. So I've included that tip down the bottom there, but keep in mind that it should be fixed by the time of this going live. Now, moving on to his abilities, and he does of course have the regular 3 abilities plus those 3 passive abilities as well, so we are going to quickly go through and cover all 6 of those abilities. His L1 ability is called Resistance Backing, which has an 18-second cooldown, and this one just allows BB-8 to reveal nearby enemies to himself and his teammates, plus it actually scrambles the enemy radar as well. It does cause revealed enemies to take 5% more damage from both yourself and your teammates, and that will actually stay active for 12 seconds. This ability is awesome for objective-based play, as you can not only scramble the enemy radar, but also reveal the enemies to yourself and your teammates, allowing you to push or defend objectives much easier than normal. Its only real downside is that the 5% damage is barely enough to even notice. Not that that's really a weakness, as it doesn't really hurt you, but it is just something that could be a little bit stronger. Moving on to his L1 R1 ability, this one is called Cable Spin, and it has a bit of a longer 25-second cooldown. This ability causes BB-8 to spin in a circle using his cables as weapons, dealing 45 damage per hit and roughly 3 hits per second, plus he actually gets a 30% damage reduction which stays active for 8 seconds. This one is amazing when it comes to crowd control or clearing out objectives. You can genuinely melt whole squads with it, and it's pretty decent against heroes and reinforcements as well. Its only real downside, similar to what I mentioned for BB-9E's Shock Spin, is that it can kind of give you a false sense of strength at times, causing you to roll into areas that you probably won't survive because it does feel like a very strong ability. Moving on now to the R1 ability, this one is called Rolling Charge, and it has a really decent 10-second cooldown. This one is pretty much the same thing as Han's Shoulder Charge in a way. Essentially it just sends BB-8 rolling forward, dealing 200 damage to the first enemy that it hits, or 150 if it is a hero, and it does also knock enemies down unless they're blocking, in which case the damage still happens anyway. This ability is really good for close quarter situations when you're in a little bit of danger, and it's really good against heroes as well. If you get an enemy saber hero down to say 150 or less and they just hold their block, you can still manage to kill them through it, so it's all around a very decent ability. As for its weaknesses, the only thing I could really think of is that the distance that you go when you use it isn't very far at all, and so despite being really great overall, that is definitely a bit of a downside. Now, moving on to those passive abilities that I mentioned, and for those who don't know what they are, these are essentially just abilities that are always active and always working for you in the background without having to do a thing. The first one is obviously just health on kill, which again every hero in the game has as well other than Bossk, and this just means that with each regular kill you'll gain back 20 HP or 100 HP if you manage to kill a hero. The next one is called Technical Support, and exactly the same as BB-9E's version, this makes it so that you actually count as 2 players when you're capturing an objective. If you're on a command post, it'll actually be captured twice as fast as if you were there with a regular trooper, and planting bombs also happens twice as fast as well, which is a game changer in GA especially, as well as in those capital ships. Lastly, he also has another passive ability called Swift Reaction, and this one makes it so that any nearby teammates gain a slightly faster cooldown speed on their abilities. It's not drastically faster than normal, but it is noticeable, and it's definitely a great ability to help your team on those objectives. So that is it for all of his base stats and abilities. Now we're going to move on to some of the more important stuff, starting with his best star cards for the large scale game modes. I usually only show 3 or 4 cards in this section, but similar to the BB9E guide, I've gone ahead and made 2 different star card builds to show you guys, the Slayer build and the Objective build. Starting off with the Slayer build, and this one is for those of you who want to maybe focus more on just helping your team by the way of getting heaps of kills, or you want to try and still play the Objective, but you like to do so by pushing those objectives and taking out heaps of enemies to help your team push in. The first card is of course the Self-Repair star card, which gives BB8 up to 100 extra health regen when fully maxed, and this is obviously just to help you survive a little bit longer, as with this equipped you can actually go all the way down to 250 HP and still fully regen, so this is definitely a good one to use. Next up is the Whirlwind card, and this one will just increase both the damage and the area of effect of the cable spin, making it even more deadly than it already is, so this one is pretty self-explanatory. Now lastly, the third card is the Spinner card, and this one makes it so that when fully maxed, if you hit only 2 enemies with cable spin, it'll actually reduce the cooldown by 10 seconds. This is pretty insane when you think about it. Pretty much any time you use the ability, it's going to be on more than one enemy, meaning you're pretty much going to get a 10-second reduced cooldown every single time. So now moving on to the Objective build, and this build is purely focused on helping your teammates as much as possible rather than going for kill streaks or anything like that. The first card I'm going to recommend is his Roll Together card, and this one makes it so that he increases the cooldown speed for his passive ability, meaning your teammates' abilities will cool down by up to 15% faster with this one equipped. The next card I'd recommend using is his Uncover star card, which makes it so that those enemies revealed by resistance backing will actually take even more damage, up to 12.5% more, meaning on top of the initial 5%, you can cause them to take 17.5% more damage, which is actually extremely handy. Now for the third card, this is the Trusty Droid card, and this one makes it so that when you reveal an enemy with resistance backing and then kill them while it's active, you'll actually heal any nearby teammates around you within a 4-meter radius. This one is very situational, but his other cards are mostly suited to his damage output, and so this one is still one of the best suited cards for his team play. So that is it for both of those star card builds. I'd still recommend mixing and matching if it does suit you better, but these are just still some good builds to start off with if you're not too sure what cards to choose. So now moving on to some of the best maps to choose BB8 on when you're playing Galactic Assault, and the top 3 that I've picked are Naboo, Jakku and Starkiller Base. Exactly like I said for BB9E, all of these maps have one thing in common, which is close quarters chaotic objectives where BB8's team play and killing ability absolutely thrives. Now as for some tips for these large scale game modes, and like I touched on in the BB9E guide, these new droids are almost solely built for helping your team in and around the objectives, and so that should always be on your mind first and foremost. BB8 is clearly much more focused on getting kills than BB9E, his abilities are more deadly generally speaking, and all around he is just a little better at surviving and getting kills, but that doesn't mean that he's built to play like Vader, so even though he is a tad better at it than BB9E, their playstyles are very much the same other than a few small differences. The first tip I have is to try and find the perfect balance of playing aggressively but also passive enough that you're not playing him like you would a Saber hero or anything like that. If you use him correctly, he can genuinely clear out hallways and objectives almost on his own with that cable spin, so it's not to say that you can't play aggressive, but you do just need to be really self-aware and just know when to play aggressive and when to drop off and play a bit more of a team role. Again, just like I said for BB9E, you almost have to play him a little bit stealthily in that you want to try and flank enemies and stay relatively hidden before pouncing to take on 1 or 2 enemies and then quickly head back into that stealthy mindset. On top of that, a lot of it is to do with his map situation and trying to get yourself into effective places on the map where you can have some nearby cover, a place to escape if need be, but also having nearby access to enemies so that you can try and get some kills while still having those backups in case things do happen to go south. His cable spin ability is honestly insane in the right situation. Both in GA and Supremacy I've actually managed to get a couple of 8 to 12 man multi-kills with it, which is not only really satisfying and great for a kill streak, but getting those kills does also help your team out too, which again relates back to helping play the objective. Let's just say you're pushing an objective on Starkiller Base and a heap of your teammates are being a bit tentative and not really pushing in. You need to be the one to kind of rally the troops and show them that they can push in there and get on that objective. Use that scanner ability to try and figure where enemies are before heading into those objective rooms, plan your attack and try to use both the rolling charge and the cable spin to catch a few enemies off guard, letting you take out a bunch of them yourself while also helping your teammates push in and help you secure the room. On that same note, the same kind of tactics do apply to defense as well, so get as close to the front lines as you can, use your scanner so that you and your teammates can see the enemies, and combine your deadly abilities with your regular attack to take out any stragglers or small groups of enemies who are caught off guard, and it will go a long way to defending that objective. All of his abilities serve a really solid purpose, and it is super important that you make the most of them whenever possible. The same thing goes for those passive abilities too. For example, if you can't do much to get kills in those chaotic areas, just staying nearby behind some cover can actually help more than you'd probably think. If you're up on those front lines and literally just sitting in the corner while you're low on health and trying to figure out a plan of attack, just being near a group of teammates with that scanner on allows them to see the enemies much easier, and their abilities will cool down much quicker too, so despite not even moving, if you're close to the battle you will actually still be helping out. These droids can be extremely hard to get the hang of as they do have such unique playstyles, but if you keep in mind that he is meant to be played with an objective mindset, then you should be able to do really well with him, and he can be pretty decent when it comes to the killstreak side of things as well. So that is going to be it for the Galactic Assault and Supremacy tips. Now we're going to move on to some of the tips for the Hero vs Villain game modes. Starting off with the star cards, and again we have two different builds, being the Slayer build again and the Teammate Support build. So starting off once again with the Slayer build, and this one is obviously just to be a bit more aggressive and get a few more kills throughout the game. The first card is once again the Self Repairs card, as obviously that extra health regen can keep you alive a lot longer. The second card is the Head First card, and this one allows you to deal an extra 40 damage with that rolling charge, taking that 150 damage against heroes to 190 damage, which is obviously a very nice little buff. Lastly, again we have the Whirlwind card, which increases the damage and the area of effective cable spin, which will obviously help a lot, especially against the blaster heroes. Moving on now to the support build, this one is focused on just being there near your teammates and helping keep them alive longer while also doing your part with a few kills here and there, generally just doing the team thing to help your team win the game. The first two cards are identical to the GA and Supremacy version, but for the third card I've actually added in the Self Repairs card, which gives that extra health regen, because again in HVV you're going to take a lot of damage, and so having that extra survivability is always going to be helpful. Again, I would still recommend trying all the cards out, but these two builds are definitely a good place to start. Now, moving on to some tips for the hero game modes, and honestly, compared to BB9E, I actually find BB8 to be a bit of a beast in these modes because of that rolling charge and the cable spin combo, along with his slightly higher damage output as well. Now, that doesn't by any means make him a great HVV character. He is still pretty hard to use at times, especially against good players, but if you try and play him a bit smarter than you would with a Saber hero, focusing more on taking chances here and there over just going crazy and trying to get heaps of kills, he can actually be a really strong character. Because he doesn't have the stun like BB9E does, you definitely have to be a lot more agile and kind of pick your spots to attack, then dodge, roll, and try and attack again here and there. But if you can do that for a while and your enemy starts getting frustrated, you can often open them up to a little bit of swing spamming, at which point you can do very well to take them out. If the enemy has even a slight idea of what they're doing, especially with a Saber hero, you are going to have a hard time, to be honest, but if you can use that little tactic and try to move and dodge as much as possible in combination with the rolling charge and the cable spin, you can still do pretty well in a 1v1. When it comes to the enemy blaster heroes, however, you can actually dominate these guys if you play your cards right. So for those like Phasma and Iden who have a stun, try to lure them into using the stun, and once they have, you can get as close as possible and use the cable spin, and generally speaking you should win that battle more often than not, especially with the rolling charge in there as well. For the most part though, exactly like I said with BB9E, you do want to try and just be more of a support player first and foremost, always sticking near your teammates and trying to force a few 2v1s or 3v2s, pretty much just being there to help your teammates while they deal most of the damage. While they're doing that, you're there to just recharge their abilities with your swift reaction ability, deal some quick damage with the shock prod, and getting some quick and easy knockdowns with that rolling charge ability. Now, I usually do the characters to look out for section, however, honestly, every character can do very well against you, so I didn't really think there was much point. As I said though, he is actually very strong against most of the blaster heroes, especially Bossk, so try and focus on those guys more than the Saber heroes, and you can do pretty well with BB8 in the hero game modes. But anyway guys, that is going to be it for our BB8 hero guide. Hopefully some of these tips helped you guys out, and if they did, then make sure to smash that like button and subscribe to the channel with those notifications on so you don't miss out on any more Battlefront 2 videos or live streams. Thank you all so much for watching. You guys have a great day, and I'll catch you all in the next one.
Crush them! Make them suffer!